Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who joins us from around the world. We're so glad you're here. This is Andrew and Renee. Welcome to the Stack series.
It is genuinely wonderful to be back here with you today.
Today we are exploring the history, biology, and mythology of sleep. And I have to be completely honest right up front. I am coming into this discussion with a bit of a personal agenda.
A personal agenda.
Yeah, I am tired. I feel like I am just constantly tired, and I have this nagging suspicion that I'm somehow, doing it wrong.
Well, looking at the data we have, you are certainly not alone in that feeling. It is a very common modern affliction.
But that's the bizarre thing, right? It's the one single activity we spend roughly 1/3 of our entire existence doing.
Which is a massive portion of a human lifespan.
Exactly. We lie down, we close our eyes, and we drift off. In theory, it should be the absolute most natural thing in the world. But looking at the stack of research we have today for this exploration, it feels like we know surprisingly little about what's actually happening under the hood, or why it's just so hard to get it right.
Because it is the great black box of human biology. We tend to treat sleep like a light switch. You turn it on, you turn it off. But it is really this incredibly complex civilization of biological processes.
And I think most of us just assume that the way we sleep right now, hitting the pillow at 11 p.m., trying desperately to get that solid, uninterrupted block of 8 hours, lying on a really soft mattress with a fluffy pillow, we just assume that's the correct way.
We treat it as the biological default.
Right, like that is the factory setting for a human being.
Precisely. We view our modern sleep habits as the biological standard, the absolute gold standard. But the research we're digging into today suggests that this 8-hour block on a soft mattress might actually be a very, very recent invention, a complete blip in human history.
And that is exactly what we're going to look into today. We're looking at sources ranging from the actual headrests of ancient Egyptian pharaohs to Greek sleep temples, all the way to some really cutting-edge studies on hunter-gatherer tribes in Tanzania and Bolivia.
It is a fascinating journey through time and biology. We're going to attempt to deconstruct the myth of modern sleep. We'll look at how our ancestors actually rested and see if ancient rituals, like those found in Ayurveda, or the evolutionary habits of indigenous tribes might actually hold the keys to curing our modern insomnia.
So if you've ever stared at the ceiling at 3 in the morning wondering what is biologically wrong with you, or if you feel guilty for not getting perfectly tracked sleep data on your smartwatch, this conversation is absolutely for you.
Let's begin with the foundation, specifically what we think we know about comfort.
Okay, yes, let's start with the physical environment, because when I think of a good night's sleep, my brain immediately goes to one word, and that is comfort.
Plush fabrics, support.
Exactly. High thread count, memory foam sinking into a literal cloud. But looking at the historical record, specifically ancient Egypt, their definition of a pillow was... frankly, it's terrifying.
It certainly wasn't memory foam. If you were a pharaoh or even just a wealthy Egyptian living around 3000 BCE, you wouldn't be resting your head on down feathers. You would be using a ros, which is an ancient headrest. And to our modern eyes, it looks more like a piece of construction equipment than bedding.
It really does. I'm looking at the image in our source notes right now. It's a curved block of wood or sometimes stone or ivory, and it's mounted on this rigid pedestal. It's hard. It's unyielding. Why on earth would anyone voluntarily place their skull on a block of wood for 8 hours?
It seems almost masochistic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But we have to strip away our modern context. We have climate control. We have pest control. They did not. So first you have to think about the heat.
Right. It's Egypt. It's the desert.
It is incredibly hot. Now imagine taking a heavy, soft cloth pillow and wrapping it around your head in that climate. You are essentially wearing a thick winter hat to bed. You are trapping all that body heat. The rolls, by contrast, lifts the head off the mattress, allowing air to circulate completely around the neck.
Oh, wow.
It is a highly effective cooling mechanism.
Okay, so it's sort of the ancient version of flipping the pillow to the cool side, but the cool side is just open air.
Exactly. It facilitates thermal regulation. And then there's the defensive aspect. We aren't just talking about heat. We're talking about bugs, scorpions, venomous centipedes.
Things you really, really do not want crawling into your ear while you're unconscious.
Precisely. By elevating the head on a pedestal, you create a gap, a physical defensive perimeter. It makes it significantly harder for a crawling insect to access your face. And beyond practicality, we also can't ignore the vanity aspect of the culture.
Vanity. How does a wooden block help with vanity?
Elaborate hairstyles. Ancient Egyptians, Both men and women of high status wore incredibly complex wigs or styled their natural hair with animal fats and heavy perfumes. A soft pillow would completely crush hours of intricate work. The headrest supports the base of the skull, right at the mastoid process, leaving the hair essentially floating in the air behind it. You wake up looking as impeccable as you did when you went to sleep.
Okay, that sounds highly practical, I guess. But I'm still stuck on the sheer physical comfort. I mean, wood directly on bone, that just has to hurt.
It likely took significant physical training to get used to. Some archaeologists do suggest they might have used small strips of folded linen to pad the curve slightly. However, the rigidity was the point. And this actually leads us to the deeper, more profound layer of the dress. For the Egyptians, it wasn't just furniture, it was a theological engine.
A theological engine. This is where the research gets really creepy, because sleep wasn't just physical rest for them, was it?
No, not at all. In the ancient Egyptian worldview, sleep was viewed as a mini-death. When you closed your eyes, you weren't just dozing off to recharge your muscles. You were entering a dangerous, chaotic, spiritual realm. The headrest was designed to physically mimic a very specific hieroglyph, the Akhet.
The Akhet. That's the symbol for the horizon, right?
Yes. The Akhet hieroglyph depicts the sun rising in the dip between two mountains. The curved upper part of the wooden headrest literally represents that dip between the mountains. So when you lay your head on it, your head becomes the sun. You're physically mimicking the sun god Ra.
That is incredibly heavy.
It is a profound spiritual statement. Just as Ra sets into the underworld each night and faces terrible demons, only to rise again every morning in victory, by using the headrest, you are ritually ensuring that you will rise. You will be reborn in the morning. It was quite literally a resurrection machine.
So in their minds, if I decide to sleep on a soft pillow instead of the wooden block, I might literally not wake up.
Within their spiritual framework, yes, you would be terribly vulnerable. That is exactly why these headrests were often carved with images of protection deities. If you look closely at the surviving artifacts, you'll see Bes, the dwarf god, or Tauret, the hippo goddess, carved right into the central support pillar.
I saw Bess in the notes. He's the one who looks like this little lion man aggressively sticking his tongue out.
That is him. He is a fierce, ferocious protector of the home, of mothers, and of sleepers. The night was considered to be literally full of demons. Having Bez carved into the very object that was physically holding up your vulnerable head was a way of keeping those nightmares and entities at bay. It was spiritual armor.
It really reframes the whole concept of a bed. We buy pillows for neck support, they were buying them for soul support, and King Tut had quite a few of these, didn't he?
He did. When Howard Carter opened the tomb, they found King Tutankhamun was buried with 8 distinct headrests. Some were just simple, utilitarian wood for everyday use, but one was made of solid blue glass and another of exquisitely carved ivory.
An ivory headdress sounds like quite the flex.
The ivory one is an absolute masterpiece of ancient art. The central column is carved in the shape of the god Shu, the god of the air, who is depicted holding up the curved part of the sky where the head rests.
So the young king is literally resting his head on the atmosphere itself.
Exactly. He is supported by the air. And at the base of this ivory headrest, there are 2 lions facing away from each other. They represent the horizons of yesterday and tomorrow. So the king's head would rest eternally suspended between the past and the future, held aloft by the god of air. This ensured his head wouldn't be severed in the afterlife, which was a very genuine, documented fear in the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
Wow, we have really lost the poetry of sleep, haven't we? Now the conversation is just, did I get my 8 hours and is my tracker green? Back then it was, did I successfully navigate the underworld and defeat chaos?
We have certainly sanitized the experience. But if we move across the Mediterranean, from Egypt to Greece and Rome, we see the primary function of sleep shift again. It moves away from spiritual protection against demons, and it shifts toward medical intervention.
Right, the Greeks. Now, they had a completely different setup for the bed itself, didn't they? The kline.
The kline for the Greeks, or the lectus for the Romans. And discussing this brings up an incredibly important point about the social nature of the bed. Today, the bedroom is the ultimate private sanctuary. It is secluded. You don't invite your dinner guests into your bed.
Usually not, no.
But for the Greeks and Romans, the bed was a multi-purpose social tool. You slept in it, yes, but you also reclined in it to eat meals, to drink wine, to dictate letters, and to entertain guests.
It brings to mind that classic image of the Roman senator eating grapes while lying on his side.
Exactly. It was a primary piece of reception furniture. Wealthy Romans had beds constructed of bronze or silver or overlaid with ivory, and they were often built so high off the ground that you actually required a specialized footstool or a small ladder just to climb into them. It was a massive visual status symbol. You're essentially saying, look how high my bed is. But the most fascinating Greek contribution to our understanding of sleep isn't the furniture itself, it's the process. The sleep temples.
The Asclepians. This absolutely blew my mind when I read the source material. These were essentially massive hospitals, but the main doctor on staff was just sleep.
In a way, yes. Asclepius was the Greek god of healing and medicine. If you had a severe chronic condition, something the regular city physicians couldn't fix, you would make a holy pilgrimage to an Asclepian. But you didn't travel there to be given pills or potions. You went there to engage in an immersive ritual called enkymesis.
Dream incubation.
Yes, dream incubation. But you have to try to imagine the sheer theatrical atmosphere of the place. You arrive at this sprawling, magnificent temple complex. You don't just walk in and take a nap. You undergo intense purification first. You undergo days of fasting. You take ritual baths in freezing cold, sacred spring water. You offer animal sacrifices. And then finally at night, you are permitted to enter the abaton, the sacred restricted dormitory.
And it's not just a quiet, comfortable room, is it?
No. The architecture itself is designed to deliberately induce an altered state of consciousness, a trance. It's incredibly dark. There might be low rhythmic chanting from the priests. There's acoustic resonance. We actually see this phenomenon in places like the Hypogeum in Malta, an ancient underground temple where the curved stone walls literally vibrate and amplify sound at specific frequencies to alter brainwaves. And then, in Greek temples, there are the snakes.
See, I was really hoping we could just skip the snakes.
We cannot skip the snakes. Asclepius' primary symbol, which is still used by the medical profession today, is the snake wrapped around the staff. Because snakes shed their skin, they physically represent rebirth and renewal. So these ancient healing temples were deliberately populated with large numbers of non-venomous snakes, and these snakes were allowed to slither completely freely among the sleeping patients on the floor.
So you're lying there in the dark, desperate to be healed of some terrible disease, and a large snake just slithers over your leg.
Or right across your chest. Or your face. There are actually historical accounts written on the temple walls of these snakes, licking the infected parts of patients, likely interacting with eye infections or open wounds. The deeply held belief was that the snake was a direct, physical conduit for the god himself.
That honestly sounds like a complete nightmare, not a medical cure.
To our modern sensibilities, perhaps.
Yeah.
But to them, it was terrifying, awe-inspiring, divine contact. The entire goal was that in this highly manipulated, terrified, trance-like state of exhaustion, Asclepius would finally appear to you in a vivid dream. And in that dream, he would either perform miraculous surgery on you, literally cut you open and fix the organ, or he would hand you a specific prescription. He would tell you to eat a certain bitter root, or run 3 miles a day, or bathe in warm wine.
And what happens when you wake up, assuming you survived the snake encounters?
You would immediately find the temple priests and recount your dream in every detail. They would interpret the symbolism and then officially administer whatever cure the god had ordered. But notice the massive philosophical shift here. In Egypt, sleep was a dangerous void where you needed armor. In Greece, sleep itself was the medicine, the mechanism of healing. Hippocrates himself, the foundational father of modern medicine, viewed sleep as a vital cooling process for the overheated blood. He famously stated, "If sleep causes distress, the disease is deadly."
They inherently understood that the body simply does its absolute best repair work when the conscious waking mind is completely shut off and out of the way.
Precisely. They recognized that the separation of the soul, what they call the psyche, from the physical body, was fundamentally necessary for deep biological restoration.
Which actually leads us perfectly to an ancient system that completely systematized this idea of different types of sleep, Ayurveda. Because while the Greeks were sleeping on stone floors with snakes, the scholars in ancient India were building a massive, highly detailed taxonomy of rest.
Ayurveda, which translates to the science of life, views sleep, or nidra, as one of the 3 absolute foundational pillars of human health. It sits right alongside diet and balanced lifestyle. But what makes the Ayurvedic approach so remarkably advanced is that it completely rejects the one-size-fits-all sleep prescription we have today.
Right, this is the dosha system.
Yes. Ayurveda identifies 3 primary metabolic energies or body types: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Every person has all 3, but usually one is dominant. And your biological sleep needs depend entirely on which energy dominates your system.
Okay, let's play doctor for a second so we can break this down for the listener. If I'm the kind of person who hits the pillow and is just instantly out like a light, and I can sleep for 10 solid hours and honestly still want more when the alarm goes off, what is my dosha?
You are almost certainly showing kapha dominance. That is the energy of earth and water. It is heavy, it is stable, it is slow-moving. Kapha-dominant types absolutely love to sleep. They're the ones who can sleep through loud alarms, through thunderstorms, through basically anything. But for them, sleep acts almost like a narcotic. They actually have to be very careful not to oversleep, because if they do, they wake up feeling incredibly heavy, groggy, and lethargic. Their system gets bogged down. They generally need about 8 to 9 hours for optimal health, but their body will always try to demand 12.
Okay, I know a few people like that. What about the exact opposite? The incredibly light sleeper. The person who bolts awake if a single leaf falls on the roof outside.
That is classic Vata energy. Air and space. Vata is highly mobile, dry, light, and erratic. These sleepers often grind their teeth at night. That is all unspent nervous energy. They possess an extremely active racing mind. Ironically, they actually require the most rest to soothe their nervous system. Usually, Ayurveda recommends 6 to 7 hours of extremely high-quality, uninterrupted sleep for them, but they are the ones who struggle the absolute most to achieve it.
And the third one?
Pitta. This is the energy of fire and water. These are your very intense, driven type A individuals. They usually sleep quite well, but only for moderate bursts. They are known for having wild, vivid, incredibly intense dreams. They are fighting epic battles. They are solving complex math problems in their sleep. And if a Pitta type wakes up in the middle of the night, they do not feel groggy. They are instantly sharply alert. They generally need about 7 to 8 hours.
What I really love about diving into this Ayurvedic model is how perfectly it explains a phenomenon I think we all experience. The second wind. Because I know everyone listening to this has felt it. You are exhausted at 9:30 p.m. You are sitting on the couch and you think, I really should just go to bed right now. But you don't. You pick up your phone and you scroll for 30 minutes and suddenly it's 10:15 and you are just wide awake. You are totally wired. You are ready to go clean the entire garage.
The infamous second wind. In modern Western science, we might chart this as a delayed cortisol spike. But the Ayurvedic clock explains exactly why it happens on a systemic level.
Can you break down that clock for us? How does the timing work?
Certainly. In Ayurveda, the 24-hour day is divided into distinct energy cycles that mirror the doshas. From 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., nature itself is deep in the kapha cycle. Earth energy. Everything in the environment slows down. The sun sets, the temperature cools, the birds stop singing. The atmosphere literally feels heavier. This period is the natural biological wave that you are supposed to ride directly into sleep.
That is your sleepy window. If you miss that wave, you're in trouble.
Exactly. Because at precisely 10 p.m., the metabolic cycle shifts. From 10 p.m. until 2 a.m. is the Pitta cycle, the time of fire energy.
Fire. In the dead middle of the night. That seems counterintuitive.
It is internal fire, metabolic fire. This is the crucial window when your physical body is supposed to be completely paralyzed in sleep, so that all of this intense fire energy can be directed completely inward. It is used to digest your food, to process cellular toxins in the liver, and on a psychological level to digest the complex emotions and stresses of your waking day. It is the internal cleanup crew, and they need a lot of power to do their job.
What happens if I am still awake?
If you are awake past 10 p.m., you hijack that energy. Your physical body registers that you are conscious and moving, so it says, oh, I guess we aren't cleaning the liver tonight. We are still working.
Okay.
Well, here is a massive dose of metabolic fire energy to help you do whatever you were doing. That is your second wind. You feel suddenly wired because you are literally running on the high-octane fuel that was exclusively meant for your internal organs.
And is that why you suddenly get the munchies at midnight? You want to go raid the fridge?
Yes, exactly. Your digestive fire is roaring. It is looking for work to do, so it signals hunger. You want to eat heavy foods, and once you tap into that active Pitta energy, it is exceedingly difficult to calm the system down and fall asleep until that specific cycle ends at 2 a.m.
And then 2 a.m. rolls around, and suddenly the energy shifts again.
Yes. From 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. is the Veda cycle, air and movement. The barrier between the conscious and unconscious is very thin. This is exactly why, if you happen to wake up at 3 a.m., it is so hard to go back to sleep. Your mind just instantly starts racing. You aren't physically hungry anymore. You are mentally anxious. You are lying there obsessing over an awkward email you sent to a coworker 3 years ago. The fundamental energy of the universe at that hour is kinetic and light.
It makes so much intuitive sense when you frame it that way. We are constantly surfing these invisible energy waves, but because of our modern lifestyles, we're usually just crashing violently into them instead of riding them.
And that is exactly why the primary Ayurvedic prescription for insomnia isn't a sleeping pill, it's the establishment of a rhythm. They call it the nacharya, the daily routine. You do things to manipulate your energy. You might practice padabhyanga, which is vigorously rubbing warm oil into the soles of the feet to literally pull that racing, anxious vata energy down out of the head and ground it into the earth. You might drink warm milk infused with nutmeg because in herbal medicine, nutmeg is a potent natural sedative. The entire goal is to consciously catch and ride that heavy kapha wave before the pitta fire ignites at 10 p.m.
It is a beautiful, holistic system. But Renee, this brings us perfectly to the active debate section of our exploration today. Because up until this point, whether we are talking about ancient Egypt, Greece, or India, we have been talking about going to sleep as if it is one single continuous event. You get into bed, you stay there, and you wake up in the morning. But there is a modern historian who essentially threw a hand grenade into that entire assumption.
Yes, indeed. This is where we have to dive into the work of Roger Ekirch.
Ekirch basically looked at all of us and said, everything you think you know about how human beings are naturally supposed to sleep is a complete lie.
Essentially, yes. Roger Ekirch is a brilliant historian who spent decades exhaustively combing through primary historical documents. He looked at court records, personal diaries, medical texts, and literature from pre-industrial Europe. We are talking broadly about the Middle Ages, right up to the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. And in all of these texts, he kept finding thousands upon thousands of casual references to a sleep pattern that sounds completely alien to our modern ears.
The concept of first sleep and second sleep.
Correct. He discovered that the dominant accepted pattern of rest wasn't one solid 8-hour block. It was heavily segmented. People would go to bed quite early, say around 9 p.m., shortly after the sun went down. They would sleep very deeply for about 4 hours. This is universally referred to as the first sleep, or sometimes the dead sleep.
And then what happens?
Then right around midnight or 1 a.m., they would wake up completely naturally. No alarms.
And they wouldn't panic. I mean, they wouldn't grab their phones. Obviously, they didn't have phones. But they wouldn't lie there in the dark, agonizing over having insomnia.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
It was a completely standard, expected part of the night. They referred to this waking period as the watch. It would typically last anywhere from 1 to 2 hours.
What on earth did they do for 2 hours in the pitch dark? Just stare at the ceiling?
They were remarkably active. The historical records are full of specific details. People would get up to use the chamber pot, obviously. But they would also get out of bed to stoke the fire, which was critical for survival in winter. They might sit in a chair and smoke some tobacco. They would pray. In fact, many religious texts considered this middle of the night period to be the absolute holiest time for prayer because the rest of the world was totally silent and free from distraction. And perhaps most significantly, they would socialize with their bedmates.
Socialize. That feels like a very polite historical euphemism.
Indeed it is. Medical physicians of the 16th century actually explicitly recommended this waking interval, the time right after the first sleep, as the absolute optimal time for physical intimacy and conception.
Really? Why then?
Because couples were physically rested from the brutal manual labor of the farming day, but they were not yet groggy and rushed by the impending chores of the morning. It was a rare, quiet time of intimacy in a crowded household that was otherwise never, ever private.
That actually sounds kind of lovely, if I'm being honest. A secret stolen hour in the dead middle of the night just for yourself or your partner.
It does possess a certain romantic quality, doesn't it? And then, after that hour or two of wakefulness, the biological wave of sleepiness would naturally return, and they would settle back down for their second sleep, which would carry them all the way through until dawn. And Ekirch points out that this wasn't just obscure medical advice. It was so common that you see it referenced casually in literature, like in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, where characters just mention waking from their first sleep as a standard marker of time.
The biological implication of this theory is just massive, because if I wake up at 2 a.m. tonight and I can't immediately get back to sleep, my modern brain instantly defines that as a medical failure. I define that as broken sleep or maintenance insomnia. But Ekirch is arguing that, no, Andrew, you aren't broken. That is just your great-great-great-grandfather's evolutionary biology trying to break through the modern conditioning. You are just experiencing a perfectly natural pre-industrial rhythm.
Exactly. It profoundly validates the stressful experience of millions of modern people.
Yeah.
It suggests that maintenance insomnia might not be a modern disorder at all, but rather a completely natural human state that we have aggressively pathologized because it doesn't fit into our modern work schedules.
I have to say, when I read Eckert's work, I was ready to accept this theory 100%. It just instinctively feels right. It feels like a massive relief. But as we know, science is never quite that perfectly clean. Because right when Eckert's theory is gaining massive popularity, along comes Jerome Siegel and his research team at UCLA. And they decided to essentially fact-check this historian by going directly to the biological source.
Yes, Siegel's team asked a very simple, very vital question. They said, if segmented two-part sleep is truly the hardwired natural state of the human animal, then human beings who are currently living in a state of nature should be doing it every night. So they packed up their monitoring gear and they traveled across the globe to study 3 distinct modern hunter-gatherer tribes. They studied the Hadza people in Tanzania, the San people in Namibia, and the Tsimane people in Bolivia.
So these are indigenous people living effectively the exact same way our human ancestors did for tens of thousands of years. They have no electricity, no iPhones, no Netflix to binge at midnight. They are living entirely off the natural rhythms of the land.
Exactly. They represent the closest proxy we have to ancestral human sleep environments. And the hypothesis was clear. If Eckert was right, these tribes should consistently be waking up at midnight to chat, smoke, check the fire, and then go back to sleep.
Did they?
They do not.
They don't wake up at all.
The biometric data was incredibly clear. These tribes sleep in one consolidated block, what we call monophasic sleep. They go to sleep in the evening, they sleep straight through the night, and they wake up in the morning. They very rarely wake up in the middle of the night for any extended period of time. There is no watch. There is no first and second sleep.
So, the natural evolutionary state of humanity is actually monophasic, one block of sleep.
According to this data, it absolutely appears so. But wait, here is the specific finding from Siegel's study that really upsets the entire modern apple cart. They don't sleep for 8 hours.
Wait, what? I thought the entire narrative was that modern technology and artificial light are actively depriving us of the massive amounts of sleep our ancestors used to get.
That is the dominant narrative, yes. But the actual data, the Hadza, the San, their average total sleep time was accurately measured between 5.7 and 7.1 hours per night.
Less than 7 hours.
Oh.
Consistently.
Consistently across all 3 completely distinct geographical tribes. The deeply held idea that our ancient ancestors luxuriated in 9 or 10 hours of sleep every night just because they didn't have light bulbs is, quite simply, a myth. They did not go to bed at sundown. They stayed up. They socialized around the fire for hours, and when they finally did go to sleep, they slept a very efficient, highly consolidated 6.5 hours on average.
Okay, I feel like I'm suffering from academic whiplash right now. Eckert looks at history and says 2 sleeps is natural. Siegel looks at biology and says 1 sleep of roughly 6 hours is natural. Who is right here? They fundamentally contradict each other. They cannot both be right.
Well, I actually think they can both be right. The key to reconciling this apparent contradiction is to look at exactly where these different groups of people live.
Geography. You mean latitude.
Exactly. The 3 hunter-gatherer tribes that Siegel studied all live relatively close to the equator. Tanzania, Namibia, Bolivia. In the tropical latitudes, the day and night cycle is remarkably consistent year-round. You get roughly 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness, no matter the season.
Right, okay, that makes sense.
But Ecker's historical research primarily focused on pre-industrial Europe, northern latitudes, places like London, Paris, Germany, Scandinavia. In the dead of winter in those regions, the night is not 12 hours long. It is 14, 15, sometimes 16 hours of pitch darkness.
Oh, I see. 16 hours is an incredibly long time to be forced to lie in bed just because you don't have affordable artificial light.
Precisely. A human being simply cannot physically sleep for 15 hours straight, just because it happens to be dark outside. It exceeds our biological capacity for rest. So the segmented sleep pattern, that first and second sleep that Ecker's documented so thoroughly, was highly likely a specific regional adaptation to the incredibly long, incredibly boring, freezing dark nights of the northern European winter. You sleep for 4 hours, you wake up to break the intense monotony and socialize, and then you sleep again.
So if you live in Tanzania where the light is balanced, your body naturally sleeps once. If you live in a drafty cabin in 1600s England in December, your body adapts and sleeps twice.
Yes. It elegantly suggests that our human biology is highly plastic. It adapts directly to the environmental constraints. We certainly possess the latent capacity for biphasic sleep. In fact, modern clinical studies run by researchers like Thomas Ware have shown that if you deliberately place modern humans in an environment with 14 hours of total darkness for several weeks, they eventually revert naturally to that segmented two-sleep pattern. But it is vital to understand that it's not the only natural way for humans to sleep. It is just one tool in our biological toolkit.
That completely blows my mind. And while we are myth-busting here, what about napping? Because I feel like the afternoon siesta is constantly cited as this deeply primitive, natural, ancestral thing that we have tragically lost to corporate culture.
That is yet another popular bubble burst by the Siegel study data. These modern hunter-gatherer tribes very rarely nap. Even in the winter, objective napping was recorded on less than 7% of the days observed. They are highly active during the daylight hours. They are hunting, they are gathering, they're moving constantly. The popular idea that human beings are naturally designed to crash and nap at 2 p.m. every afternoon might actually have a lot more to do with our heavy, carbohydrate-loaded modern lunches than it does with our deep evolutionary biology.
Wow, this is really turning absolutely everything I thought I knew upside down. But there was another specific finding in that Siegel study that I think is the real game changer here. And this brings us perfectly to the frontiers section of our discussion. Because this finding suggests that the key to everything isn't actually light, it's temperature.
Yes, this is the absolute frontier of sleep science. This is the concept that might change literally everything about how we diagnose and treat modern insomnia. For decades now, sleep science has been singularly obsessed with light. Blue light, screens, melatonin suppression. We operate on the assumption that light is the master switch.
Right, it's circadian rhythm one-on-one. The sun goes down, gets dark, we get sleepy. The sun comes up, it gets bright, we wake up.
That is the model.
Right.
But the hunter-gatherers in the study did not do that. They routinely stayed up for roughly 3.3 hours after the sun had completely set.
Yeah.
They did not go to sleep just because it got dark outside. They sat by the fire, they talked, they crafted and repaired tools, they were active in the dark.
So if the darkness didn't make them pass out, what finally triggered them to go to sleep?
Temperature. The researchers found an incredibly tight predictive correlation between the drop in the ambient environmental temperature and the onset of sleep. The tribes systematically fell asleep as the surrounding air naturally got colder. And even more interestingly, they almost never woke up at sunrise when the light hit their faces. They woke up at the nadir.
The nadir. What exactly is that in this context?
The nadir is the absolutely coldest point of the 24-hour temperature cycle. Usually this climatic phenomenon happens just moments before the sun breaks the horizon.
Let me make sure I'm getting this. So the primary biological trigger to wake up isn't our brain registering that it's bright out. The trigger is our body registering that it's freezing.
Yes. Our ancient brains seem to be fundamentally hardwired to initiate sleep when the environmental temperature drops, and to terminate sleep and wake up when the temperature hits rock bottom and begins to rise again. It is primarily a thermal trigger, not just a photic or light-based one.
And this presents a massive fundamental problem for us modern folks, doesn't it?
It is arguably the silent killer of modern sleep. Because we all live in perfectly climate-controlled boxes. We set our home thermostat to a comfortable 70 degrees, about 21 Celsius, and it stays locked exactly there all night long. We have completely eradicated the natural temperature curve. We have created a thermal flatline.
We've lost the biological signal. Our bodies are waiting for a memo that never arrives.
Exactly. Our deep brain structures are patiently waiting for that ambient temperature drop to say, okay, it is safe to release the melatonin now, and then waiting for that sharp temperature rise in the morning to say, okay, flush the system with cortisol and wake up. Without those thermal signals, our circadian rhythm is profoundly confused. We are essentially biologically deaf to our own environment.
So you could wear all the fancy blue light blocking glasses in the world, but it simply won't fix the problem if your bedroom is sitting at a constant balmy 72 degrees.
The cutting-edge researchers now suggest that mimicking these natural ancestral temperature curves, meaning deliberately letting your bedroom get quite cold at night and then programming the thermostat to warm it up significantly in the early morning, might actually be far more effective at curing insomnia than simply hiding from our phone screens.
That is a huge paradigm shift. It's not just about aggressively dimming the lights. It's about turning down the heat.
And while we are on the subject of light, there's a fascinating nuance there, too, that we often miss. We focus so incredibly heavily on avoiding light at night. But the tribes in the study get massive amounts of natural light exposure early in the morning. Thousands and thousands of lux. Meanwhile, we wake up, we stay indoors, and we sit in comparatively dim offices all day.
So we are essentially light deprived during the day, but then light overloaded at night. We have the exact inverse of the natural pattern.
One prominent researcher beautifully described modern humans as being light malnourished during the day and light obese at night. The clearest prescription from observing nature seems to be get outside and get blasted with bright light in the morning, and then let your house get actively cold at night.
I want to touch on one more crucial aspect of this frontier, which is actually a modern return to some very ancient technology. We talked about the physical environment, the temperature, and the light levels, but what about the sensory environment? We have some truly fascinating notes in the source material on indigenous technologies of sleep, specifically regarding the intentional use of scent.
This concept brings us full circle back to the spiritual aspect of sleep, but it underpins it with a very real physiological mechanism. Indigenous cultures in North America, such as the Mi'kmaq and the Anishinaabe, have utilized the practice of smudging for centuries before sleep. This involves carefully burning specific dried botanicals like sage, sweetgrass, or cedar.
See, I've always thought of smudging as a purely spiritual practice, cleansing a room of negative energy or bad spirits.
It absolutely is that within their cultural framework. Sage is burned to remove negative heavy energy, while sweetgrass is used to attract positive good spirits. It is beautifully referred to as the hair of Mother Earth. But if you look at the underlying neuroscience of what is happening during that ritual, it is remarkable. The olfactory system, our physical sense of smell, is the only human sense that entirely bypasses the thalamus. The thalamus is the brain's logic and routing center. Scent bypasses it completely and goes directly into the limbic system.
The limbic system, that's the lizard brain, right? The core emotional and survival center.
Exactly. By utilizing these specific evocative scents every single night as part of a dedicated ritual, you are intentionally creating a powerful Pavlovian trigger. You smell the burning cedar, and your brain instantly, without any logical processing, receives a deep chemical signal of safety and transition. It acts as an olfactory safety cue.
The concept of safety seems to be a massive recurring theme across all these cultures. We saw the Egyptian headrest with the scary god Bes carved into it to protect against demons. We see the smudging to invite good spirits. And then there is the physical sleeping arrangement itself.
Yes. In almost all pre-industrial societies globally, from the hunter-gatherers on the plains of Tanzania to the Ainu people in Japan to the ancient Egyptians, sleeping was an inherently communal activity. You slept surrounded by your extended family, you slept huddled in a pile.
Safety in numbers. It's a basic survival tactic.
Precisely. To the primitive evolutionary part of our brain, sleeping entirely alone in a pitch-dark, utterly silent room is actually terrifying. It signals supreme vulnerability. It signals to your nervous system, I am separated from the pack, I am unprotected, and a predator could enter at any moment.
And yet, that is exactly how we try to sleep now. We value extreme privacy above almost everything else. Kids are separated into their own rooms down the hall. Parents are in the master suite with the door locked. We are totally isolated.
We are isolated, and then we genuinely wonder why we suffer from such high rates of nocturnal anxiety. We culturally label it insomnia, but biologically, it might just be hypervigilance. Our deep brain is constantly scanning the silent environment for unseen threats because we are fundamentally alone. The Ainu culture of Japan, for example, explicitly teaches that communal sleeping is vital because it actively fosters closeness and emotional stability within the nervous system.
So what you were saying is sleeping next to a partner who aggressively snores might actually be biologically good for me.
On a primitive nervous system level, probably yes. Even if the noise is annoying, the physical presence signals that the pack is here. You are not alone. You are safe enough to drop your guard.
This naturally brings us to the implications section of our exploration today. What does all of this diverse data mean for us, the tired, stressed out, modern listeners? I want to specifically talk about a brilliant term I saw highlighted in the research notes, orthosomnia.
Orthosomnia. It is a completely new psychological disorder, entirely birthed by the digital age. The root words literally translate to correct sleep. It is defined as an unhealthy obsession with achieving the perfect sleep score.
I have to admit, this one hits very close to home for me. I check my smartwatch sleep tracker the absolute second I open my eyes every morning, and if it tells me I only got a 60% score, I instantly feel exhausted, even if I actually felt totally fine before I looked at the screen.
That is the nocebo effect in action. It is a negative placebo. We obsessively look at the morning data from our Oura rings, our Apple Watches, our mattress sensors. We see that we supposedly only got 15% deep sleep, or that we woke up for 20 minutes at 3 a.m. and we instantly become stressed. We have developed intense performance anxiety about an activity where we are literally unconscious.
And then that anxiety releases a wave of cortisol, which makes it even harder to fall asleep the next night, right?
It is a brutal, self-perpetuating, vicious cycle. But honestly, the historical and biological research we have covered today
Right.
kind of gives us a massive pass, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It is so freeing. If you look at the Siegel data, the healthiest human beings on Earth, these hunter-gatherers who have perfect blood pressure and zero rates of obesity, are only sleeping 6.5 hours a night. They are waking up occasionally. Their sleep architecture is not a perfect, uninterrupted flatline.
So if you only manage to get 6.5 hours tonight, you aren't failing at sleep.
No.
You are basically functioning like a peak Hadza warrior.
I love that reframe. I'm going to tell myself that tomorrow morning. And if I wake up at 2 a.m., I am not biologically broken. I am just briefly enjoying the watch, like my ancestors did in the 1600s.
That psychological reframing is incredibly powerful. It takes the immense cultural pressure off. We have to collectively realize that the rigid expectation of an 8-hour continuous block is largely an artificial construct of the Industrial Revolution.
Right. It happened when we fundamentally shifted from task-oriented time-like farming, where you just work until the sun goes down or the specific job is done, to clock-oriented time dictated by the factory whistle.
It's exactly. When Thomas Edison commercialized the incandescent light bulb, he fundamentally turned sleep into an inconvenience. We began actively colonizing the night. We started culturally treating sleep as nothing more than a mechanical battery recharge. Something annoying you just have to get over with as quickly as possible so you can get back to being an economically productive citizen.
And that toxic attitude is arguably what is actually killing us. We view sleep as the mortal enemy of daytime productivity, instead of respecting it as the absolute biological foundation of life itself.
It truly is. We are violently fighting our own biology. We are flatlining our environmental temperatures. We are blasting our retinas with artificial light at midnight. We are isolating ourselves in totally silent, lonely rooms. And then we are stressing ourselves out into an early grave when we don't instantly pass out for 8 perfect hours.
So how do we practically reclaim the night? Based on all these sources, what do we actually do?
We need to culturally return to the concept of Ratracharya, the dedicated night routine. But I don't just mean brush your teeth and jump in bed. We deeply need a transitional buffer zone. We need to intentionally signal safety to our nervous system.
We need to make the bedroom an actual sanctuary again, not an entertainment center.
Keep it incredibly dark, keep it cool, allow that temperature to actively drop throughout the night. Perhaps use a consistent scent ritual to trigger that limbic safety response. But most importantly, we have to change our core mindset. There is a genuinely beautiful quote from the source material by an author named Eric Lucas about the concept of the big dark.
Oh, I absolutely loved that part of the reading. He was talking specifically about the onset of winter, right?
Yes. He points out that modern humans have completely lost the fine art of doing nothing. When the winter darkness arrives early, we instinctively fight it. We flip on every bright LED light in the house, we turn up the TV, we furiously try to maintain our summer levels of hyperactivity. But he argues we should embrace the darkness. We should view the long, dark evening as a completely acceptable, natural time for biological dormancy, stillness.
It is so true. We feel an immense amount of social guilt if we aren't constantly doing something productive. But lying still, resting, sleeping, that is actually the ultimate productive act for your biology, just not in a strictly capitalist sense.
It is deeply fundamentally productive for the restoration of the soul and the repair of the body.
Well, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We have journeyed from the rigid wooden pillows of the Egyptian pharaohs that literally promised daily resurrection, all the way to the terrifying, snake-filled, trance-inducing sleep temples of ancient Greece. We've closely examined the Ayurvedic biological clock and finally understand why we get that wired second wind at 10 p.m. We have debated whether we are historically supposed to sleep in 2 distinct shifts or just 1, and we learned that our incredibly healthy hunter-gatherer cousins are actually sleeping far less than we thought, but perhaps they are sleeping much better.
And I think the ultimate unifying key takeaway from all of this research is that there simply is no single universally correct way to sleep. There is only the specific way that works best for your unique biology and your specific environment. But we have to recognize that our modern artificial environment, with its flat temperatures, its constant blue light, and its lonely isolation, is actively, aggressively fighting against our ancestral biology.
So maybe the ultimate answer to our exhaustion isn't a new prescription pill. Maybe it is just programming a colder bedroom. Maybe it is inviting the dog onto the bed to signal safety to our nervous system. And maybe it is finally realizing that waking up at 2 in the morning is just a harmless historical echo, not a medical emergency.
And perhaps it is fundamentally treating sleep not as a mechanical chore to recharge a battery, or as a genuine spiritual practice, a dedicated time to visit the gods, or at very least, a quiet time to visit yourself.
I really love that perspective. So here is a final provocative thought for you to mull over as you turn off your lights tonight. If the ancients viewed sleep as a sacred time to visit the gods or heal the soul, and we only view it as a mere recharge for tomorrow's work, have we lost the spiritual dimension of rest? Perhaps the massive global insomnia epidemic is just our collective bodies crying out for a meaningful ritual, not another pill.
That is a profoundly important question to end on.
Before we wrap up, thank you to all our partners, sponsors, and scholars who made this podcast and the research possible. We're truly grateful for your support.
And to our listeners, thank you for being part of this journey with us. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If you did, be sure to subscribe and support us in Patreon. And of course, you can write to us in comments if a specific topic needed to be covered would help us all to grow.
Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and let the search for wisdom guide you forward. Have a great day.